This is Mpho Nenweli, and this is the Succeed in Business podcast. This podcast will bring the best in you. Failure is inspiration. Success is within your reach. Do not give up. In today's podcast, I'm going to discuss a very sensitive but interesting topic, and it's called the poison of tenders in business in South Africa. The podcast will be quite very short, and I'm not doing this podcast to accuse anyone of corruption. And I also would want to point out that as much as the podcast does focus a lot on government, I have worked with a lot of noble and not corrupt government officials here in South Africa. I will discuss the benefits of tenders. I will also discuss the bad side of tenders and also point out what is it that we can do looking towards the future in the context of tenders. There's quite a variety of benefits of the tendering system, and at the dawn of democracy, the South African government saw it fit to pass a raft of laws to promote what we call broad-based Black economic empowerment. And the intention there has been to redress the past imbalances in the economy related to our apartheid past, where Black people were not allowed to partake in the economic activities of the country, leading to a very highly skewed economy, which is run by the minority, whilst the majority languish in poverty, unemployment, and inequality. The intention of these laws has been to bring former disadvantaged communities into the economy and to ensure that with minimal efforts, people from these communities can have access to economic resources. And the significance of tenders is that they are aimed at empowering the majority of the people that have been out of the economy. And if this is not based or riddled with corruption, it can be a very powerful tool to creating a balanced economic participation for social stability and continuous happiness of the people as we share the spoils of the economy equally. And the most important thing to note here is that government is the biggest consumer of goods and services in South Africa. So tenders have become such a big thing in our economic system, and they deserve a discussion that is fair, factual, and honest. Unfortunately, there's quite more bad related to tenders compared to the good that I've just listed, which is quite very minimal. The bad side of tenders is that white monopoly capital or white-owned companies here in South Africa, some of them decided to co-opt a few people from former disadvantaged communities, for example, Black people, and they put them in the board of their companies, on the boards of their companies. And this will be your typical educated Black people and politicians to create an impression that they are empowering former disadvantaged communities and the primary aim being that they want to have access to these lucrative government tenders. In some cases, some white-owned companies just decided to do what we call fronting, that is to create a fake membership of black people in the directorship of their companies, and then go on to have access to tenders or to win tenders that are meant for former disadvantaged communities. And in some cases also, it has led to some extreme activities where there will be pooling of resources so that you can have one big tender that is given to one good crony who is a beneficiary of the political largesse. I learned, when engaging with people, for example, in Gauteng, in the past, you'll find that each hospital or clinic will have its own budget of maintenance that will be controlled locally, and local small enterprises can benefit from doing maintenance. Over time, all those tenders were pulled from each hospital, each clinic, and centralized into one provincial government department and into big tenders that are given to just one individual. So that's one of the examples where people want to control a bigger cake so that the beneficiaries of corruption can even get easy access to the one individual who is given this big tender. So that is one example of how things can be bad. And also, obviously, tenders have been used now as a get-rich-quick scheme, to the point where people would get tenders as a vehicle where they can amass wealth, which is then used to buy all sorts of things, including existing businesses, and getting rich quite very quick. A person can just become a multimillionaire overnight with just one single tender, with a company that's in some cases registered today, and the following, in few weeks, it gets even $1 billion worth of tenders. There's some scandals we've heard about in Transnet, where a company with no experience will get even a tender as big as $1 billion, which is quite very crazy stuff. The other thing also which is bad about tenders is the issue of political patronage. Those who are politically connected are the ones that tend to be given good tenders. Even if they do not perform, they get the political protection, and the harm is felt by the community at large that doesn't receive the required service or goods of good quality. And also the other thing, also tenders have become a feeding trough, where people really feed like pigs, amassing a fortune for a privileged few, which is quite very harmful to the society at large. And they have also led to hatred, fights amongst people, and in some cases, outright killing of each other, over tenders. These things have been documented where people have been killed over money related to tenders. The other thing also, which is quite a very big disadvantage, is that tenders have also created a type of entrepreneurs with reduced innovation and creativity. I saw this when I was working for an organization called SEED, which was funded by a company called, managed by a company called Adelphi, based in Germany. You will advertise for 15 awards for small or emerging startups to apply to get funding, to be assisted to write up their business plans, just really to finalize the conceptualization of their businesses. And you will not manage to get even 10 companies applying for the award, we will not even be able to allocate the 15 awards in the whole country in South Africa. And it just dawned on me on how limited innovation within the small business space was and still remains. And obviously, the pursuit of tenders have made it of very little interest to emerging entrepreneurs to conceptualize projects that take longer to take off and mature to the point where a person can make a living out of them. Tendering has also created highly dependent business people that I would love to quote a broadcaster called Rulani Baloyi. She calls these people who are into these tenders admin people. Really, they are just paper pushers, and she actually even refuses to label them as business people because really she feels that these people are just filling in forms and going on to supply staff, just becoming runners for municipalities or government entities, without really adding much value except just putting a top up or a markup on stuff that can be bought cheaply by government. And it also created a sad situation of highly qualified people who do not really care, and all they want is financial benefits. They don't really care about the quality of the goods or the quality of the service that is being supplied to the beneficiaries or the public at large. And in some very sad situations, there's serious inflating of prices. And the big interest when these people inflate prices for goods is counting the number of people who are going to benefit from the corrupt activity. So you can end up selling a shoe to government that costs 200 rands at more than 10,000 rands, which is quite very ridiculous. But that is basically driven by the obsession to make sure that the beneficiaries of corruption get as much cream as possible. And that is basically the harm that tenders brings to the public service, where resources are just wasted on very few individuals at the expense of the larger public. The other thing also which is very important to note is that it has also created some breed of highly arrogant and abusive government officials who can even go to the point of destroying your business, even if it's legitimate, if you don't give them the bribe. In some cases, they will make sure that they just withhold payment to your business and make sure that your business collapse if you're not going to pay the bribe. It has led to endemic and systematic corruption, which in some cases, giving examples of in my province, in Limpopo, I've heard of government departments where, the corruption will be a lot, involve a whole chain of people. For example, even the messenger who photocopies the tender document will call the person who has submitted a tender and asked to be given a bribe. Anyone sitting in a bid committee adjudicating on a tender will call the person who has submitted the tender and ask for a bribe. The politicians who, somebody will be issuing the letter of appointment will call and ask for a bribe. The politicians will also ask for a bribe on just one simple tender, to the point where the entrepreneur gets nothing out. These things are done normally when the tenders are imminent, and then you get calls, where you are being cornered to pay money, so that this tender can be given to you. I've heard of cases where someone will even travel with a tender document, go and meet the tenderer and say, my signature is the last one here. If you don't put 100,000 rands here, I'm not going to put the signature. Put the money now and I'll sign. That's how things are being done. In some cases, you also find name calling. People will come trying to secure a particular tender and point out that no, we are representing the president of the country, so you must give us this tender. And you only to find that these are just lies. It's just an issue of name dropping. In some cases, you also find some serious infighting within government officials, in government departments or parastatals or municipalities, to the point where projects collapse because people are jostling on who is getting the bribe and who's not getting the bribe. And creating a situation where there's no care about the fruitless and wasteless expenditure that government will incur if projects don't move on time and if projects are cancelled, leading to all sorts of legal ramifications and losses. The other thing also that has come out of tenders is the issue of crumbling infrastructure, which is poorly built, and it is basically schools, low-cost housing, roads that just gets washed away within the same year they were built. It is basically the result that we have found of people who have no clue being awarded technical tenders to do stuff that they don't know. But it is because we have got people who simply do not care about the outcome or the quality of the work that is going to be done. And that is fueled mainly by greed, and greed with no conscience, really. And then we have come up to find that now we've got a breed of wealthy government officials that wear very expensive clothes. I've found some people who brag about wearing shoes that go as much as 30,000 rands, 50,000 rands, many cars, expensive cars, many houses, it's quite crazy the amount of stuff that these people do with the money that they amass through tenders and corruption. And we also find that if you are on the wrong side, even if you get the tender, you will be punished, and you can also be destroyed, because people who don't, support you getting that particular tender will make sure that the project doesn't not move and you are not paid. I've faced similar challenges in some government officials that I will not mention names here in Gauteng, where people will just block any form of payment coming your way. They will make sure the project doesn't move, and they collapse it because you happen to have found a project that they don't want you to get. One of the challenges of this corruption is the fact that government officials benefit immensely from the corrupt activities, and they get money that is tax-free, whilst the business owner will be obliged to account for any money that has gone through his business account. And that is quite a big burden. So you end up with a business person who gets money just passing through his company, but without leaving any benefit at all. I've seen also extreme cases where people will demand a bribe even on projects that they do not run. That's the desperation that comes out when there's this competition on corruption. And sadly, civil servants, some who are corrupt, amass a fortune, and they go on to buy cars, luxury cars, houses, consume some of the most expensive liquor, and some of them go on to even brag about their lives and post on social media. So in some cases, I've heard of very extreme situations, in particular from my province where I come from, Limpopo, where in some institutions, tenders will be ring-fenced and given to each official will have a number of tenders which they will be manipulating for personal gain. And in some very extreme cases, I've even heard of bidding for tenders and the bidding being done on who will be paying the highest bribe. The one who pays the highest bribe gets the tender, and it's quite very upset. And sadly, this is being done without any care on the quality of the product or service. That is completely immaterial to civil servants. But personal gain is the one that is paramount. And things that are more painful that I've also observed is that, I must start by pointing out that I send a word of caution for people pursuing tenders. There is quite a lot of black on black hate. As much as the government is black run, there is a lot of self-destruction amongst the black communities that is fueled by tenders. Entrepreneurs or startup businesses must be very much beware of the evilness that black people have on each other. And I have experienced that firsthand. And I'm talking about things that I have gone through. They believe that if you're a black entrepreneur, you are not deserving to be paid for work that you have done. And you will be treated with disdain, even if you are a professional. It doesn't matter how many degrees you have and how much experience you have amassed over the years and the quality of the work that you're doing. Because there's also no consequence management. Whatever they do to you, if they stifle the project, it doesn't progress, no one is going to do anything to them. They are just a power upon themselves. And the other issue also there, they don't have any sense of agency whenever they're executing projects. They are self-obsessed and they don't care much. One of the issues that is quite very sad is that as a business person in this whole corrupt situation, you end up not being paid. And more so if you're black, you are seen as not deserving any form of payment or not being paid on time either. And in most cases, these people don't care much about how they treat you. They don't care about the people that you work with as a team and the families that depend on these contracts that they give you. So you have to worship them and you will be punished severely if you do not worship them. Because also they are in a system that rewards their bad performance and they get bonuses literally every year, no matter how bad they perform. People can be in government positions for years and not deliver any tangible work, but they will work until they retire and get their good amount. And by the way, it's important to note that South African civil servants are one of the highest paid civil servants in the world. But the amount of unprofessional behavior and abuse that I've seen is quite very sad. And most of them are also, some of them, not most, driven by political alignment. So once they know they have got the politicians on their side, they will treat you with impunity. And there's not much you do. People get destroyed, they lose their houses, they lose their businesses. There are people that are never paid on time, that are never paid at all for years until everything collapses. And some people, as I talk, they are in mental facilities because of depression based on the abuse that is being done by civil servants in relation to these tenders. So it's quite painful to see the distraction that tenders have on the emerging Black entrepreneurs in a country where the level of entrepreneurship is one of the lowest. It is very hard to convince any normal person that doing business is the best thing in life once they also witness the amount of distraction. In some cases, you will also find yourself being awarded tenders of very poorly conceptualized projects where you will be working very hard, and you'll find that the stages are aligned such that where you do the most hard work, you are paid the least, and then you suffer immensely to pull through such projects. You might have to get loans, getting your company indebted. By the time you get the whole project completed, you have just been servicing debts and there's nothing that you go home with. Government tenders are high risk, very much high risk, and they can be very destructive. And the problem is there's too much corruption and pursuit of personal agendas. There are politicians that I don't want to mention by name who ran the country for years, and they made sure that corruption became deeply entrenched in all corners of South African society, from the small local municipality to big government departments to big parastatals, almost to the collapse of some of the jewels of parastatals that were top in the world. They ran them to the knees. So pursue government tenders at your own peril. Be very cautious and plan things appropriately. Know what you're going to face, and if possible, walk away, because some of the bribes and the corruption you will encounter will make sure that you get very seriously indebted to SARS, and you will end up not having anything to show for the hard work for the years. You will not have a good house, you will not have a good car, but the civil servants that you will be working and feeding with corruption, they will be bragging about their achievements and stuff. One thing that I want to emphasize is that avoid government tenders at all costs, but do them when you are very desperate for business. But avoid investing resources because you may end up in a very difficult position. Do not take funds or loans or from other businesses or family to run a government project, because you may end up with more debts and more problems. And also take note, government has got people that I've met who have mastered the art of talking without doing much. And they will compromise the quality of your work. They will ruin your dignity, and they will throw mud at you. So it's very important to understand the type of people that you might be working with in government. Because as much as there's quite a lot of people who are doing good work and making things move, but the few rotten apples that are there, they're causing immense distraction. In particular, when it relates to government resources and tenders, that's where the rot is. It's so shocking that I had my mother come here to get her eye cleaned because of a cataract, and she went to a big hospital here in Pretoria, and she was told that the machine, has been broken since October, and it will be done in January. 2025. And you ask yourself, does it take so many months for government officials to just procure a piece of machinery? And is it really the right thing to do for a big hospital to just have one machinery for operations that are very much needed, where people are blind and some can't see anymore, and they need this procedure desperately? But at the same time, you hear politicians, even here in this province, here where I am in Pretoria, Gauteng, talk very nice. The speeches are so flattering, and you'll think there's much happening, but go and check. You'll realize it's quite shocking, the amount of inadequacy and the terrible situation in which government officials have to conduct their work with no resources or very minimal resources in a country that is very much endowed with natural resources, with money that can be used to make people's lives far better. So it is important to note that government, civil servants, in particular those related to dealing with tenders, some of them get really rewarded for minimal effort, and there's no consequence for engaging in any wasteful and fruitless expenditure, which is quite very bad. And in the tendering space, you have to be conscious of the fact that things can be very ugly. And it can lead to death in some cases with a fight over resources, because you are dealing with people who are self-obsessed with no conscience, people who worship material and money. And sadly, most of the money being siphoned through corruption, it doesn't do any significant good. It feeds into the capitalist system, which is white controlled, making the whole tendering system as a form of redress quite very questionable. I also would like to point out that in my experience, the tender system has not produced any notable industrialists that we can be proud of from former disadvantaged communities. It has produced quite a lot of people with a big ego who live the big life that we can see, and the evidence is all over the place. It also has produced a society that promotes debauchery, drinking and sexual orgies, destruction of families and youth through what we call blessers, or people with a lot of money that go around just sleeping with youth. There's a lot of social ills that the tender system has brought with people who have got access to money and with very minimal care for society. In some very extreme cases, I've heard of people who got paid without doing any simple work, and they collect the money, share with their cronies, politicians or civil servants, and the public at large doesn't have anything to show. There's no benefit at all in a country with so much resources. And we have people who have got no schools, who are having no food. It's quite sad. So what is the future after all this depressing discussion that I've had? What I see is that corruption will collapse governance in South Africa in the long run. It will cause social unrest. There is a desperate need for government to push for meritocracy in order to bring the confidence of people in governance. Lifestyle audits are quite very critical to root out the rotten apple that are tarnishing the good image of government. Consequence management is quite very critical too if we want to go somewhere. Courts that can deal particularly with corruption are needed, which can fast track trial on cases of people that are corrupt. and we can introduce the highest forms of punishment for officials and business people that are promoting corruption at the expense of the public at large. And all tenders need to be transparent, submitted online, allocated online, to the point where everybody can go and check who got what tender and for what. That is very important to build confidence in the people and to minimize overcharging of government. Because once there's transparency, we can see who is charging far more than what is the industry rate for any goods or service. I would want to emphasize again that government needs to push for meritocracy, the appointment of people on merit, and ensuring that the right people are rewarded, and rooting out of the rotten apples within the civil service. If politicians do not address corruption in South Africa, they are going to lose control and the country will collapse. That is unavoidable. The sweet and the hollow speeches that I've been listening to through the State of the Nation address, the State of the Nation address, State of the Province address, which are done with a lot of pomp and ceremony, are going to run out of steam. People are not stupid. They will see that they are being told the same thing all the time with very minimal change on the ground. If we're still going to have hospitals with machines that get broken and fixed once in 6 months, we must admit we are going nowhere. If we're going to have projects like those we see, where there's huge, large-scale loss of money in construction of low-cost houses, and the members of the executive councils within provinces don't get any consequence, we must know that the speeches that are being given are just as hollow as they come, and they're going to bring no good both to the politicians themselves and to the public at large. It is important for me to give advice to any entrepreneur who gets a tender to say, use the money wisely. Start sustainable business. Avoid dependency on the tender system. You must know that the tender poison has ruined governance in many places, led to the collapse of parastatals and municipalities. It has ruined lives and it has caused a lot of suffering. So be cautious. If you get a tender, use the money wisely. Build a legacy for yourself and your children. Get out of the space, because you will entangle yourself in a lot of corruption and you will fail to get out. And one day your children will come and see you in a small cell and you'll talk to them through the window. And by the time you come out of jail because of the corruption, your wife will not be there, your children will not know you, the country at large will not even accept you. You will have to work 1,000 times harder to restore the little that you had before you got into the jail system. Tenders are quite very poisonous and ruinous. I think we need to look in the face and accept the reality that this has not brought a lot of good in our country. So much harm has happened because of tenders. Once again, this is the Succeed in Business podcast. This podcast will bring the best in you. Failure is inspiration. Success is within your reach. Do not give up. And I thank you.